introduce to you the first speaker, Mr. Michel Chossudovsky. Our first speaker wears many hats. He is an economist from the University of Ottawa who has published several books relating to poverty, globalization, and the role of international monetary institutions such as the World Bank and IMF. An esteemed writer, his works have been translated into more than 20 languages. His other hats include that of an advisor to numerous governments and also consultant to international organizations such as the UNDP. Ladies and gentlemen, he is Professor Michel Chossudovsky.
Dear friends, ladies and gentlemen, it's a great privilege for me to be here today as an economist in a country which is committed to national sovereignty in the economic sense of the word, and at a very critical moment in the history of this country, namely 1997, under the helm of Dr. Mahathir, precise and specific mechanisms, financial mechanisms were put in place which allowed or at least prevented the slide of the ringgit and foreclosed the possibility of massive bankruptcy and impoverishment as occurred in Thailand, Indonesia, and Korea. I say this is not a rhetorical question, because war and economic and macroeconomics are intimately related. These free market reforms have been essentially an instrument of dramatic impoverishment of millions of people around the world, and the fact that Malaysia was able, under very difficult conditions, to foreclose this, I think it will be a landmark, certainly in the nation's history for years to come. Today, the world is at the crossroads of the most serious crisis in modern history. The United States has launched, together with its indefectible ally, Great Britain, a military adventure which threatens the future of humanity. It is also coupled, as I mentioned, by these deadly macroeconomic reforms. The war has an economic rationale to it. It is not, it certainly is not, it does not have the objective of weeding out terrorism. It has underlying economic objectives, the most important of which, as far as the Middle East war is concerned, is securing control over oil reserves. It is characterized by advanced weapons systems. This morning, Helen Caldecott focused on the issue of nuclear weapons. There's the whole doctrine of preemptive nuclear war, which is, of course, crucial. But one thing which I think is very important to understand is how the concepts have been turned upside down. as far as nuclear weapons are concerned, the United States has developed a new generation of what we call tactical nuclear weapons. They're mini-nukes, small nuclear weapons, but in fact they're not so small. They are between 1/3 and 6 times a Hiroshima bomb. And what has happened is that these nuclear weapons now, after a period of review, are considered, quote unquote, safe for civilians. Okay? Safe for civilians. Bear in mind, it's a little bit like the advisory on a cigarette, which says smoking is dangerous for your health. Now, what has happened, very important, is that the Pentagon has enlisted scientists and research labs, and they said, well, essentially these explosions are underground and they are safe for civilians. And in 2003 December decision, the Senate ultimately approved the use of tactical nuclear weapons in conventional war theaters. This decision has not been reported extensively or even in a minimal way in the international press. But what this means today is, in addition to the debate that we had this morning on nuclear weapons, that this new generation of nuclear weapons now has been reclassified as a conventional weapon which can be used in conventional war theaters. That is precisely the nature of that Senate decision. And it is also slated to be used in the next phase of this war. Coupled with the military agenda, which is a war without borders, we see the emergence within the Western European countries, particularly the United States, Canada, Britain, Australia. We see the emergence of a police state apparatus. We see the criminalization, what I would describe as the criminalization of justice, because ultimately those who decide on the judicial system are the war criminals. And we have a whole pattern and structure of arbitrary arrests of individuals who are tagged or targeted for alleged terrorist activity. Ladies and gentlemen, the war on terrorism, which is the main justification for waging a war of conquest, which is clearly acknowledged in military and national security documents, that war on terrorism is fabricated. It fabricates an enemy. The enemy is presented. There's the image of the enemy, bin Laden. In fact, the whole issue becomes so absurd. If you read some of the speeches and the national security documents, Osama bin Laden is presented as a nuclear power. Okay? Al-Qaeda is presented as capable of setting off nuclear explosions, so that it is an upcoming nuclear power, and therefore this justifies the development of preemptive nuclear weapons for defensive purposes and so on, and the use of these tactical nuclear weapons again in conventional war theaters. This is the map of the area. As you see, it is